The Dead Sea Scrolls are actually in the AD era, not 200 BC at most, like I was led to believe. Remember, John David, the excitement of the scrolls was over the fact that they predated Christianity by a couple of hundred years at most, and the atheists were hopeful that writings in them, not just Old Testament, would show that Christianity wasn't original, but inspired by the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Also, if you've read your brother's book of Biblical Mormonism, like I have, and of course my dad definitely had, your brother Richard talked about how very little has changed in the Bible, as the Dead Sea Scrolls pointed out. Do you believe that do you believe what Richard wrote, or do you believe what Richard wrote about how the Bible hasn't changed much, as the Dead Sea Scrolls pointed out, or do you believe what you sent me today? By the way, you really seem to want me to drop the Book of Abraham issue of Smith numbering and labeling old pagan Egyptian funeral documents, and think you made it clear to me what you believe about it. But it's hard for me to drop it because you haven't made it clear to me. I mean, I don't know if you view it like some Mormons do, a conduit of God that only inspired Smith to write up a story about Abraham being tied up to a sacrifice, to be sacrificed by a bald Egyptian priest with a knife, or that he was wrong in his numbering and labeling of the surviving papyrus, but right on about tons of scrolls that were burned up in a fire and can't be verified now, like the golden plates, which could only have been seen by the eyes of faith. I think you are going for the latter here, John David. You do remember the time you sent me another picture that showed the exact same type of scene, but that it was not a bald guy trying to sacrifice Abraham, but the Egyptian god of the dead, Anubis, preparing the body of the dead man, Horus, for burial. You remember that, don't you? To me, it was gray. It was a gray-colored thing. To me, that pretty much nailed it, that the drawn-on bald guy's head should have been Anubis also. That pretty much nailed it, that it should have been Anubis. Especially when this papyrus was with 2 Egyptian mummies that Smith purchased with the scrolls. I mean, why should the Book of Abraham be in a tomb with 2 pagans who were prepared for something not kosher? Anyway, John David, I'll try to steer away from the fact that Smith numbered and labeled something that had nothing to do with Abraham and plenty to do with Egyptian mummies. But it will be hard, since it seems so damning of Smith's credibility.